Mark's life turned upside down when he woke up to find his wife, Lucy, missing in the middle of the night. But when he saw her under a street lamp, laughing with a mysterious man before getting into his car, everything changed. The lies, the secrets, and the growing suspicion set him on a path for revenge. As Mark uncovered more, he realized nothing was what it seemed. Now, he's determined to expose the betrayal and make Lucy regret ever thinking she could hide the truth. Will he get justice or lose everything? Mark woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling of emptiness beside him. The bed was cold. He reached out, searching for the warmth of his wife's body, but it wasn't there. His heart started beating faster. She wasn't in the kitchen, nor was she sitting in the living room. Her phone, gone from the nightstand. Then his gaze stopped at the window. Far away, near the bus stop, under the glow of a street lamp, Lucy stood. She was talking to someone. At that moment, she took a step forward and, before getting into a black car, lightly touched a man's hand. Mark didn't move. He just stood there in the dark bedroom, feeling something invisible yet heavy settle inside him. The next morning, Lucy returned as if nothing had happened. She hummed cheerfully while making breakfast and played with the cat rubbing against her legs. "You're up early today," she remarked, cracking eggs into the pan. "Couldn't sleep?" "Yeah." Mark tightened his grip on the spoon as he stirred his coffee. "Where were you?" Lucy froze for a second, then quickly recovered with a light smile. "I fell asleep on the bus. Ended up on the other side of town. My phone died. Had to wait for the first morning route." "Strange. I thought you only commuted to the agency office where you work." She pressed her lips together. It was an invitation from a new client. In the middle of the night? "He works late. His kids are active in the evenings." Mark said nothing, just took a sip of hot coffee. That same day, he started looking for answers, but finding them wasn't easy. Lucy continued to act as usual. She laughed while telling stories about the kids she entertained. She touched his hand lightly when passing by. She looked at him the same way she always had. But now Mark knew that look might mean nothing at all. A few days later, he overheard her on the phone. No, everything's fine." "Yeah, Mark doesn't suspect a thing." "Oh, you have no idea how much I'm looking forward to it." "Yes, me too." He stood in the hallway, his back against the wall, feeling his heart pound too loudly. The next time she fell asleep on the bus, Mark didn't go to bed. He got in his car and followed her. Lucy was standing at the same spot again, and this time, he saw him. A tall man in an expensive suit. His posture was confident, his movements unhurried. Lucy laughed, throwing her head back at something he said. Then he wrapped an arm around her waist, opened the car door for her, and they drove off. Mark stood in the darkness for a long time, clenching his fists. He needed more than just suspicions, and he decided to act. Mark stood in the shadows, watching as the car with his wife disappeared around the corner. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. He simply inhaled the cold night air and gave himself a moment, not to do anything reckless. He had no proof yet, only suspicions, and that wasn't enough. The next morning, Lucy was in her usual cheerful mood again. Mark observed her, trying to find even the slightest clue. She smiled like always. She kissed him on the cheek before leaving. She even joked, "You look so serious today. Thinking of running away from me?" "Is there anywhere to run?" he replied, masking his tension. She laughed, and a second later, the door closed behind her. Mark put work aside. He couldn't fix other people's pipes when his own marriage was falling apart. He needed the truth. He tried a simple approach. He called Lucy in the middle of the day. "Hey, honey, how's it going?" "Oh, Mark, sorry. I'm a little busy. The kids are thrilled about the new game." "Where are you right now?" "At Mr. Davis's house," she answered quickly. "How is he?" "Oh, as usual," she said casually. "Strict but fair." Mark felt like he had been struck by lightning. She was lying. Last night, he personally saw this Mr. Davis, and he didn't look strict. He was the man holding her by the waist. Mark didn't know what he felt more, anger or the cold, aching sense of loss. But he understood one thing. He wouldn't stop until he knew everything. He decided to act differently. That evening, when Lucy came home, He behaved as usual. They had dinner, talked about small things, even laughed. Mark did everything to make sure she suspected nothing. And when she fell asleep, he took her phone. The password hadn't changed. He opened her messages, and what he saw made him clench his teeth so hard that his jaw ached. I already want to see you. I need you so much. I miss you. You're so special. You were incredible today. Your laughter is the best music. Mark read every word. His wife responded just as passionately. He scrolled back through their conversation. They wrote to each other every day, several times a day, sometimes at night, while she lay beside him in bed. He felt like a fool. Closing the phone, he put it back in place and lay awake in the dark for a long time. The next day, Mark contacted a friend who worked in security. Can you help me find out where she's going? Damn, Mark, are you sure you want to know? It's no longer a question of, do I want to? I have to. His friend sighed. All right, I can set up tracking on her phone. You'll get the exact locations where she goes. But be careful, brother. Mark thanked him and went to work. He wanted to keep himself busy to stop thinking, but it didn't work. Only one image kept spinning in his head, his wife in another man's arms. That evening, Lucy was as sweet as ever. She asked about his day, told stories about the funny kids she worked with. Mark listened, smiled. He didn't even know how he managed to pretend that everything was fine. That night, he received the first message from his friend. She's at a hotel. It felt like his heart stopped. He slowly clenched the phone in his hand. The moment of truth had come. Mark sat in his car in front of the hotel, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his fingers turned white. He could have just walked in, burst through the doors, and seen everything with his own eyes. But something held him back. He didn't just want to catch them together. He wanted to know more, to understand how deep this went. He waited until the hotel doors opened and saw her. Lucy. She walked out with that man. They were laughing, and she lightly touched his arm. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something more, an intimate connection. But then something strange happened. The man said goodbye, kissed her on the cheek, and got into his car. Alone, Lucy remained standing on the sidewalk, watching him leave. She seemed to be waiting for something. Mark felt his body tense. She didn't leave with him. So who was in the room? A minute later, another man walked out of the hotel. A stranger. He didn't even glance at Lucy, just walked in the opposite direction. And she turned back to the entrance and went inside again. Mark sat watching all of this, and for the first time, his thoughts were no longer just about betrayal. There was something more going on here. The next day, he couldn't hold back. When Lucy got ready to go to work, Mark decided to follow her. She really did arrive at a huge mansion, the house where, according to her, her clients lived. But she didn't go in right away. She waited. And there he was again, the same man from the hotel. Mark watched as they talked for a few minutes. Lucy looked nervous, while the man remained unfazed. Then he handed her a small black package and walked away. She quickly hid it in her bag and entered the house. Mark realized this wasn't just about a lover anymore. His wife was hiding something, and he was going to find out what. His heart started pounding faster. Now he was sure Lucy wasn't just lying about her job and her affair. There was something more. He waited until she went inside, then stepped out of his car. He needed to know what was in that black package. Circling the house, Mark noticed a slightly open window. Inside, children's music was playing, and the sound of little ones laughing filled the air. Lucy was talking to someone, but her voice was tense. "This is too risky," she whispered. "It's only a matter of time," a man's voice replied. Mark tried to peek inside, but could only make out blurry silhouettes. He listened closely. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" "Mark isn't stupid," she sighed. "But he trusts me." That hit harder than he expected. He had trusted her. Until yesterday. If he finds out, the man began, but Lucy interrupted. "He won't. I have everything under control." Mark slowly stepped back. He didn't know what she was controlling, but it sounded dangerous. That night, he decided to act. At home, Lucy behaved as usual. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone while Mark pretended to read the news. "How was your day?" he asked. "Great. The kids were amazing." "And Mr. Davis?" She looked up. "The same as always." Why do you ask? Just curious. Lucy held his gaze for a second before smiling. You're acting strange today, Mark. Just tired. He watched her as she got up and went to take a shower. As soon as the water started running, Mark grabbed her bag. He rummaged through it and found the black package. Inside was a stack of cash. Large bills. A lot of them. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. He pulled out the envelope and then noticed something else, a small key. Mark put everything back in place. He needed to figure out what this was all about. The next morning, he followed Lucy again. But this time, she didn't go to the mansion. She stopped at an old warehouse. Mark watched as she looked around before slipping inside. He didn't wait. He pulled up his hood and followed her. Inside, it was dark. Lucy was speaking to someone. Did you bring it? It's all here. Good. The next phase starts soon. Mark pressed himself against the wall. The next phase? What was she involved in? If anyone finds out, the man's voice said, you know what will happen. Lucy stayed silent. Mark felt a chill run through him. He had to expose her. He would make sure she confessed herself. Mark froze, hiding in the shadows of the warehouse, his heart pounding in sync with the tense silence. He knew he was taking a risk, but it was too late to turn back now. Lucy had gotten herself into something serious. He just needed to find out what. Will this be the last time? She asked, her voice trembling. If everything goes according to plan, the man replied, his tone offering no reassurance. But remember, you've gone too far to stop now. Lucy remained silent. The money? Yes, she said, though her voice was unsteady. Good. Take the new package and don't ask questions. Package? Mark clenched his fists. This wasn't just an affair. His wife was involved in something illegal. Carefully, he peeked out from behind the shelves. Lucy was holding another black package, and in front of her stood a stocky man in a leather jacket. He didn't look like a friend. If anything goes wrong? The man leaned in closer to Lucy. You're finished. Lucy tightened her grip on the package and quickly left the warehouse. Mark knew he had to act. He got home before she did, made himself a coffee and sat down to wait. When the door finally opened, he heard the familiar sound of her footsteps. Mark? You're home already? Her voice was casual, as if she hadn't just been carrying around suspicious packages all over town. Yeah. Decided to cut the day short. Lucy walked into the kitchen and froze when she saw the way he was looking at her. Something wrong? Should there be? She sighed and dropped her bag onto the table. You're acting strange. Mark took a slow sip of his coffee. Where were you? At work. At Mr. Davis's? Yes, she replied, a little too slowly. Not at the warehouse? Her eyes snapped to his. What? I was there, Lucy. I saw everything. She hesitated but quickly pulled herself together. Mark, you misunderstood. Did I? Then explain. What's with the money, the packages, and what exactly is your last time supposed to mean? Lucy bit her lip. It's not what you think. Then what is it? She stayed silent. Lucy, if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'll find out myself. Her shoulders trembled slightly as she looked away. It's not just about me, Mark. Great. So you're involved in something so dangerous you're afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid, her voice broke. Then she took a deep breath. I just don't want you to get hurt. You should say that to a mirror. Because you're the one in trouble, not me. Lucy covered her face with her hands, then suddenly looked up. Give me a day. Tomorrow, I'll explain everything. Mark didn't believe a word, but he nodded. One day. The next morning, Lucy was gone. Mark woke up at 8. She was already gone. Her phone lay on the nightstand. He opened the closet. Some of her things were missing. She had run. Damn it. Mark immediately called his friend, the same one who had helped him set up the tracker. Joe, I need help. What happened? Lucy's gone. Shit. All right, I'll check her route. A few minutes of silence. She left home early this morning, headed for the train station. I'm on my way. Mark shoved his phone into his pocket, grabbed his keys, and rushed out of the apartment. At the station, he spotted her almost immediately. She was standing by the ticket counter, clutching that same black package. You've got to be kidding me. His voice made her flinch. She spun around sharply. Mark, where are you going? I can't explain. Why? Because I'll find out how deep you're in this mess. She took a step back. It's not that simple. All right, then here's how it's going to be. You stay here and tell me everything, or I call the police. Lucy stared at him. You wouldn't. I'm dialing right now. She sighed. Fine, but not here. They got into the car. Lucy held the package on her lap, gripping it nervously. You have to trust me, Mark. Trust you? Are you serious? I'm not doing this for myself. Mark shook his head. Then for who? She looked at him as if she had finally made a decision. For my brother. Mark froze. What? He's in serious debt. And if I don't do this, they'll kill him. Mark didn't know what to say. How much does he owe? 100,000. Jesus, Lucy. I couldn't just stand by and watch them destroy him. Mark stayed silent. He had always known Lucy's brother was trouble, but this was serious. You're stealing money to pay off his debt? I'm not stealing. I'm delivering. Delivering what? She lowered her eyes. Something that can't be sold in a store. Mark barely held himself back from slamming his fist against the steering wheel. Damn it. Lucy clenched her hands. I had no choice. Do you understand that they could lock you up? She remained silent. Mark took a deep breath. Listen, we need to find another way out. It's too late, she whispered. What do you mean, too late? She lifted her eyes to him. They know about you. His breath caught. What? They said that if I don't finish the job, you'll be next. Mark pressed his lips together. Then we get ahead of them. How? We find their bosses and force them to back off. Lucy let out a nervous scoff. That's impossible. We'll see. Mark started the car. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. He felt his body filling with cold fury. Sitting behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind kept replaying the events of the last few days. Lucy had lied to him, not just about the illegal dealings, the debts, or the criminals, but about something worse, about betrayal. He couldn't ignore it. The way she looked at that man, the way she touched his hand, the nights she spent with him, hiding behind made-up stories. Mark remembered the messages he had seen on her phone. Each word had cut him like a blade. She said it was necessary, that she had no choice. But Mark could no longer believe her. He knew the climax was near. Lucy thought she was in control of the situation, but she was wrong. This time, he was the one playing the game. Mark decided he wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. She had hurt him, and now it was her turn to feel the pain. He didn't say a word as he stepped out of the car, leaving Lucy in the passenger seat. She didn't try to stop him, though her fingers anxiously gripped the black package. Mark knew she was starting to suspect something. The next few days, he spent in silence, carefully planning his next move. He no longer questioned her about the drugs, no longer followed her meetings. He pretended to still be undecided about helping her while he dug deeper. He found the man she had been with at the hotel, Daniel Brooks, a businessman, divorced, lived in a large estate outside the city. A man who, to Mark, seemed like a true predator. One evening, when Lucy disappeared again, Mark drove to that house. He sat in his car, watching the glow from the windows. There they were, Lucy and Daniel. She smiled at him, sitting across the table, her hand resting on his knee. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Something inside Mark snapped. She could lie about everything else, but her body didn't lie. It betrayed her true desires. He drove home and started putting his plan into motion. First, he found the right person. Laura, an old acquaintance of his, a journalist. She knew how to dig, how to uncover things people wanted to keep buried. When he told her everything, she just smiled. Over the next few days, they worked together to unearth Daniel Brooks' dirtiest secrets. Lucy had no idea that her husband knew far more than she thought. Once everything was ready, Mark prepared to strike. He waited until Lucy left for Brooks' house again. He knew she would stay the night. This time, she didn't even bother with another lie. Just said she had important matters to handle. But this time, Mark didn't stay in his car. He broke into the house using a key he had stolen from Lucy's bag earlier. He didn't need to search far. The voices led him straight to the bedroom. What he saw enraged him more than ever. Lucy lay on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her bare shoulders glowing in the soft light of the lamp. Daniel stood by the mirror, buttoning his shirt. They looked as if this was routine for them. Mark didn't wait. He turned on the camera on his phone and took several photos. Then he simply said, "Lucy." She jolted up, her face shifting from relaxed to terrified. "Mark." Daniel turned around, his face first showing shock, then irritation. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mark didn't answer. He just stared at his wife. "Is that all you have to say?" Lucy burst into tears. She started saying something, making excuses, begging for forgiveness, but Mark was no longer listening. He pulled out his phone and showed them the photos. "Now it's not just me who knows." Lucy froze. What did you do?" Mark shrugged. "Some things shouldn't be kept secret." Daniel tried to take control of the situation. "Listen, kid, let's not do anything stupid." "You've already done enough stupid things," Mark smirked. "I know everything about your business, Daniel, and soon, so will everyone else." The man tensed. "What do you mean?" "My journalist friend just got all the details on your dirty deals. Tomorrow, they'll be all over the press." Lucy clutched the blanket, her eyes filling with horror. "Mark, don't." "I have to." Mark turned and walked away. Lucy tried to stop him, but Daniel held her back. "He won't do it." "Oh, I absolutely will," Mark threw over his shoulder. The next day, news about Daniel exploded all over the internet. His company collapsed. Lucy disappeared. And for the first time in a long while, Mark felt relief. He sat at a bar, spinning his glass and watching his reflection in the mirror behind the counter. His face looked tired, his eyes empty, his lips pressed into a thin line. He knew he had changed his life forever. What he did to Lucy and Daniel couldn't be undone. But this was only part of his revenge. He wasn't finished yet. Lucy had disappeared, but not for good. She would try to come back. He knew it, and he had to be ready. The door opened, and a woman walked into the bar. Slender, confident, with dark eyes and her hair pulled up in a messy bun. She stopped beside him and sat down without an invitation. Her name was Kate. She was a friend of Laura, the journalist who had helped him with Daniel. But Kate wasn't just interested in investigations. She was interested in Mark. And he noticed. A few days ago, she had messaged him, suggesting they meet. He had agreed without hesitation. He wasn't looking for a new relationship, but rage was eating him alive. And Kate was the perfect way to get rid of it. They left the bar together. She led him to her place, and he didn't resist. By the time she locked the door, her hands were already on his chest, and his were on her waist. It was fast, rough, without unnecessary words. Mark didn't think about Lucy. He thought only about making her feel the same pain he had felt. The next morning, he left Kate's place without saying goodbye. But he knew she wouldn't forget him, and that this wasn't over. When he got home, a note was waiting for him under the door. "We're not finished yet. Lucy." He smiled. The game was on, and this time, he would see it through to the end. Mark stared at the note for a long time, feeling his anger boil inside him. He knew Lucy wouldn't give up so easily, but he didn't expect her to show up so quickly. He thought he had destroyed her, that she would have nowhere to return after everything that happened with Daniel. But she was here, and she had a plan. He didn't rush to open the door. Instead, he walked to the window, carefully drew back the curtain, and looked down at the street. There was no one there. This only made him more uneasy. If she left a note, it meant she knew where he was. And if she knew where he was, she could have been watching him for a while. He ripped the paper into small pieces and threw them in the trash. Then he left the apartment, walking the usual route to the bar where he had spent the last few evenings. He had no specific plan. He just wanted to understand what Lucy was thinking and how far she was willing to go. The bar was half empty. Kate was sitting at the same table as last time. She looked up at him when he walked in and smiled. He sat down next to her without saying a word. She handed him a glass of whiskey, and he took a sip. The alcohol burned his throat, but it felt strangely satisfying. They spent several hours together, talking about nothing of importance. He knew she felt something for him, more than just curiosity. But he didn't have the energy to respond in kind. He couldn't think about anything but Lucy. When he returned home, the door was unlocked. He paused on the threshold, listening. It was quiet inside, but he knew someone was there. He entered, slowly closing the door behind him. The apartment looked the same as it had in the morning, but there was a foreign scent in the air. It was her perfume. He hadn't smelled it in a long time, but he couldn't forget it. On the table in the living room, there was a new note. "This isn't over yet." Mark clenched his fists. He didn't know what she wanted, but he knew one thing. She wouldn't leave until she got what she wanted. The next day, he went to Laura. She was the only one he trusted. He told her about the notes, about the unlocked door, about how Lucy hadn't disappeared. Laura listened carefully, then nodded and got out her laptop. She quickly checked Lucy's latest bank transactions, her social media activity, and her location from old phone data. Lucy had been careful, but not careful enough to stay unnoticed. She had rented a hotel room in a nearby neighborhood. Mark didn't wait. He went there immediately. The hotel was cheap, with dim lighting and old furniture in the lobby. Mark asked the receptionist about the room, giving Lucy's name, but they refused to answer. So, he just went upstairs, searching for the right door. He found her on the 3rd floor. The door was locked, but light seeped through the crack. He knocked, unsure of what he would do when she opened the door. The door didn't open right away. Then he heard the sound of the lock, and Lucy stood before him. She looked different, tired. Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked, and her hair was disheveled. But when she looked at him, there was something new in her gaze. She didn't look defeated. She looked ready for battle. She invited him inside, and he entered, knowing he shouldn't. The room was small, with a bed, a table, and a suitcase in the corner. Lucy closed the door and looked at him as if he were the guest she had been waiting for. She didn't start apologizing. She didn't beg. She simply said that he didn't understand the whole picture, that what had happened with Daniel was only the beginning. Mark listened to her, trying to understand what she was planning. She talked about Daniel's business, about how she knew more than she had told him. She said she had information that could destroy not just Daniel, but other people as well. She said the game had become much bigger than he had thought. Mark didn't know if he should believe her, but he knew one thing: this wasn't over, and he wouldn't let her win. Mark stood in the room, feeling the air around him grow heavier. Lucy was no longer the woman he had once lived with. She had changed, and now, standing before him was not a victim, but a predator who knew she had the upper hand. She said she wasn't afraid of him, that she knew his steps in advance. She said he had played the pursuer for too long, but now they had switched places. She had more cards in hand than he thought. She knew about Laura. She knew about Kate. She knew what he was planning and how he felt. Mark realized he had made a mistake. He thought he controlled the situation, setting traps, but in reality, it was he who had fallen into them. Lucy moved closer, her eyes glowing with dark fire. She said she wasn't fighting for excuses or forgiveness anymore. She said she had one last move. Mark tried to predict what she would do, but he didn't have time. The door suddenly opened, and 2 men barged into the room. They didn't say a word. One grabbed Mark by the shoulders, the other punched him in the stomach. Pain surged through him, making him bend over, but he didn't scream. They threw him on the floor, and Lucy calmly sat on the edge of the bed, watching. She said she had always had a backup plan, that he had been too overconfident, that he had forgotten the most important thing. She always knew how to play this game. Mark realized that now everything depended on her. He was no longer the one in control of the situation. He didn't know what would happen next. The men lifted him up and dragged him out. He still managed to see Lucy smiling. Then the door closed, and darkness engulfed him. If you were in Mark's shoes, what would you do after discovering your wife's betrayal? And is there a boundary beyond which you couldn't return to the relationship?